Hi, I'm Gordon Burkell from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can check out and learn more at filmmakeru.com. Every week, we have a professional sit down with us to discuss their work and give you a chance to ask questions. This week, I'm joined with editor Todd Downing, whose work includes Difficult People, Miss America, and Russian Doll. Welcome to the show.
Ellie, thanks for having me.
I guess my first question is, as a fan of Difficult People,
I always like hearing that.
how do you cut, or how did you approach working, because essentially you have terrible people as your protagonists.
Yeah.
So how did you work with the team to make us still want to watch the show, I guess you could say, and not be turned off from watching?
I think a lot of it was actually the writing, because I mean, as horrible as they are, most of the people they encounter are worse. Mm-hmm. So not most of the people, but a lot of them. And and also just, I think, I mean, sorry, now I'm just gonna get into writing rather than editing, but I guess you just got to lean into a bit of what you identify with them. You know what I mean? Like, you're like, oh, that annoys me too. You know, they take it to an extreme in their reactions to what they're annoyed by, obviously, which is where the comedy is. But yeah, I didn't find it too hard. I don't know. I mean, I think their likability, even though they're awful, is more in the writing than the editing for this one. It wasn't, that didn't seem like, actually that never really crossed my mind. And I think it's so over the top too, you know what I mean? Like their you know, neuroses are so high,
yeah,
that it, you know, it reads as comedy regardless. It's not like,
yeah, it's absurd.
Yeah, you're not identifying with their horribleness as much. You're just kind of laughing at it.
So what were some of the challenges you found in that show?
I think the biggest challenges were, I think to get the story, because it's funny, because I remember when the showrunner I was talking to, he was like, most shows are led by story, and he was like, Difficult People was led by jokes. So I think getting both to, you know, but obviously you need both to sustain. So I think a lot of it was like storytelling, you know what I mean? But the story was there, so it's not like, oh God, how is this gonna work? But it was also like, just, you know, the jokes were there and the jokes were funny. So I think it was a lot more focus on, you know, narrative in a way, art in the editing room, and being like, oh, do we need this scene? How long does this scene need to be? You know what I mean? Which is everyone, every episode, every show that you do. But this one especially, I think it was like, there's so, you know, there's like a joke every like you know, half a second. So we weren't worried about losing jokes as much as, you know, just trying to get the drive of the narrative working. Yeah.
Was it like on set, were they doing, because you know how like a Judd Apatow film, they'll just do several takes with different deliveries, ad-libbing? Was that sort of the approach?
Oh yeah. Julie and Billy both, like, I mean, they have such a close relationship. You know what I mean? It's like they were just, you know, they were friends in real life, and I think they, you know, they would just riff off each other constantly. And it's funny, we would get all these, it's funny what you learn about acting when you edit different episodes or different shows. You know, they had some pretty famous actors, guest stars on that show, you know, who were brilliant performers, but they couldn't improv. You know? And like Julie would throw this like crazy shit at them, you know what I mean? And they were just like, back to the line, you know what I mean? It was kind of, and it's really interesting to see like her talent and her, you know, what she would go for, and these other people who are immensely talented, but just in a different way, you know what I mean? And seeing how those, you know, trying to get those to work together.
Well, and what's interesting in terms of comedy, and I haven't done much with comedy in terms of editing, but like I always see, whenever you see performers who are actors, or sorry, performers who are comedians, they have a sort of timing that's going to dictate your pacing a bit too. So like the delivery, like I think about, oh, now his name slips me from Difficult People, but the main, Billy Eichner, and like just watching his Billy on the Street is all chaos almost, right? And so when you juxtapose that with like a well-known actor who's probably more reserved, and that, how did you play those two off of one another? Did you find any struggles in terms of pacing and shifting? Those?
Definitely. Yeah, I think that it was kind of shocking to be like, oh, this actor can't do everything. You know what I mean? And like but it was fine because they're good actors, and like you could always cut with it and stuff. but like, it's, you know, you're used to cutting the scenes with Julie and Billy and Andrea Martin or Cole Escola, you know, who are all just like, you know, improv geniuses.
Yeah.
Cole especially would just come up with stuff where you're like, what? Like, you know, like come up with a complete rhyme or a song for a take that like just in between takes, you know what I mean? It was just kind of really special. So it's fun, you know, and they were all supporting characters, and you're focusing on the main characters, and they're, you know, the guest stars are guest stars, and they're there, you know.
Yeah.
Do you? It's more important to get Julie and Billy working, and all the others, you know. I think.
Do you prefer to work with like ad-libbed material versus scripted, or is it the other way around?
Because when they're improvising, it is a pain. I mean, it's worse for the assistant editor because when they're scripting it, they're like, you know, there's a lot of work to do because all these different takes. So, I mean, but if it's good improv, it's amazing. You know what I mean? There's nothing like it. It's just because it's so fresh and so, you know, it's
unexpected.
Yeah, you're just like, where did that come from? And it's great. It feels very real in a way.
Yeah.
But there really is nothing worse than bad improv. You know what I mean? It's really.
We've all seen it at least once.
Yes, you know, in Oscar-winning films even. And it's just like, yeah. So improv, I do like, if they're a good improv, I love them. You know what I mean? I think it's so much fun. You know, like Natasha is on Russian Doll improvs quite a bit too.
Yeah.
You know, and then she'll just throw out these like, you know, completely randomly different things in every take, and it's kind of great in the edit because you're like, oh, does this scene need to be, you know, when you watch it in the run, then you're like,
yeah,
you have choices of it. Is it comic? Is it strange? Is it you know, dramatic? You know, so when they can do it, yeah, I love it.
Now with Russian Doll, how did you guys go about? Because whenever you see something where it has a weird time structure or a weird story structure, you need to set that up for the audience. So how did you guys work? You know, obviously you're going to have the script, but how did you work with the director and the showrunner to come up with a structure?
When luckily with Russian Doll season 1, you know, and season 2, like they you know, when they shoot it, they're very, very meticulous and like, this is for this, this is for that. Sometimes, you know, since there's repeat stuff, you know, that we could swap things, but actually we didn't much. I think maybe just a couple times. So, and only in a way where you're just like, oh, maybe we want this performance to be more like what she was acting like in scene 2 when she was looking in the mirror or whatever, you know. And I don't even know. I think maybe we did it once or twice, so it wasn't even that much. I think that is more of a pre-production thing of making sure they're organized and, you know, and getting the loops right, because that was actually, you know, people ask me that question a lot about Russian Doll, and actually that was not that hard because it's all there for you. You know what I mean? It's been sorted out and structured for you that way. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so in terms of editing, what are the types of projects you like to work on?
I mean, I don't know, like you mentioned Difficult People, Mrs. America, and Russian Doll, but I also have a background in documentary, and during the pandemic, I did the feature documentary. And I like mixing it up, you know what I mean? It's like, and even like sort of, I mean, from Difficult People to Mrs. America is a world away as well, you know what I mean? And the seriousness and you know, versus almost slapstick. So for me, it's not, you know, I just like working with original, talented people more than a certain genre. Like, I don't really care what genre it is or what, you know, if it's comedy, drama, or doc.
Well, in terms of the doc, like when you're working with the footage, how much was it cinema verite? Was it sit down interview? What was the?
My background, like I lived in London for 12 years, and a lot of that was very journalistic documentary, like current affairs, you know, sort of, which had a lot of talking heads sit down, you know, really kind of explaining things to you. And then it kind of moved a lot more into like what they call it? They call it different than us. Actuality.
Yeah.
And what we call verite. And the verite stuff is definitely more creatively rewarding to do, because it's just like you're the world, you're just like there's no script and they're not saying things they've rehearsed. It's just like, here's this world you're trying to make sense of, you know. So that I love when they get good verite stuff. That's incredible to use, you know. And I feel like that helps with scripted stuff too, you know, because it sort of, opens your mind a little bit about what can be done with the scene. You know, you're like, oh, maybe we don't need to follow the script so much on this. And, you know.
How do you like, because the thing with documentaries is, you know, like when I've worked on scripted stuff, it's very much, you know, you have your sort of standard approach to cutting it. Whereas with docs, I feel like there's so much footage. A lot of times they might still be shooting, you know, and you don't know what's going to come. So there's, how do you know, I know how I like to approach a doc, and I've heard different ways of approaching cuts. How do you like to approach your edit?
I feel like, you know, you have that imposter syndrome thing. Like every time I start a project, I feel like I have that. Like, I'm like, I know what I'm doing. Because like, I think almost, you know, I pretty much have my way of going. I always watch all the footage, scripted or doc. But then like, I don't always have the same pattern every time I cut something. You know what I mean? It's kind of just like what feels right for that project. About like with, you know, especially with documentary, because it's so open to what you're doing, you know, but I think to me, the key is just to watch absolutely everything first, you know what I mean? So you know what you're dealing with. And then I think you can start to decide a bit more, you know, I just try not, and also I guess one thing that I am kind of strict about is trying not to cut anything too tight at the first pass, you know what I mean? Just be like, okay, this is my first pass, it sucks, but just leave it and move on, you know what I mean? So you can get through, then you can whittle it down into what it's supposed to be, because I think you can get caught in the weeds. Is that what it's called? Is that the cliche?
Yeah. Well, I think, and not to bring up Judd Apatow a lot, but he always calls his first draft of screenwriting, his first script, his first pass at it, he calls it his vomit draft. He's like, just get everything down.
Yeah, I think I just read that actually.
Yeah, and it's like, it's going to be terrible, and then we can go back and edit it and fix it. And,
I think editing and writing are very similar in that way too, right? They're like, what goes in, what goes out, you know. I think that's a really good way to look at it. You know, another friend of mine who was an editor described it as a sculpture, like a clay sculpture, you know what I mean? Which is just sort of like, you have the clump, you put the basic shape, and then you like whittle away into the detail, which I thought was a good metaphor.
Well, and it's always tricky, especially with verite stuff. Like I think about the verite stuff I've worked with is trying to figure out, because you're taking, you know, an event that could have been half an hour to an event that could have been 3 hours, and trying to get it down to like a minute. And so how do you do that whittle down process for your, or how do you approach it?
Well, I'll take out, I think kind of after I watch it, then I start taking chunks, like sort of long chunks of, I think, useful parts. So then, you know, the hour will go down to 20 minutes. And then I just keep on, and usually I use a lot of locators, being like, this happens here, this happens there. So I can always go, you know, then duplicate it and then go back. And then I just keep whittling away into being like, you know, what's the least amount that you need to tell the story, and basically, you know what I mean? It's like, to tell the story and get the characters, you know, personality and emotion too. So I feel like it's just every cut is just like, you know, just goes smaller and smaller and smaller until you're at the essence of what it
is. Now, how do you determine when to stop? Because, you know, usually like
when the
budget runs out, but
I think it's kind of when anything else you take out ruins the scene. You know what I mean? I think once you get it to the point where there's nothing in there that's not essential, you know, and I don't mean essential just storytelling. I mean essential like maybe it's just this cut to a look of someone that's like, oh, you need to know how they feel in this moment too. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's just getting it down to where just there's nothing in there that can't come out.
Yeah.
Probably.
So where, and this depends on the project, I guess, for documentaries, but in editing, we're constantly manipulating things, you know, and in documentary, there's that fine line of, you know, editing what people are saying to tighten it up.
Yeah, and keep the truth of what they're saying.
But keep the truth. So how do you determine that?
I think you just have to be honest with yourself. You know what I mean? And be like, am I doing this to make it more exciting and more dramatic, or more, you know? And when you know, like I said, I started my documentary career in London in 2003, something like that. You know, and the BBC is very, very strict about all that. Like, you know, I think more liberties are taking in the U.S.
Just a little bit.
But the BBC is like, there's so many rules about, like, you know, making sure that they're saying the right thing, and they have a thing called duty of care, like you have to before that goes out, they call every person who was in it or even appeared in it and tell them what they said. You know what I mean? They're very conscientious. So I mean, I was trained that way, to be very conscientious about the people I'm representing. So for me, it's like, that's kind of second nature now. You know what I mean? I would just feel really icky if I was like, oh, we'll just make it do this because that's funny if they do that, or better if they do that. You know what I mean? I'm like, the truth is good enough. You know what I mean? You don't need to lie.
Yeah. Well, so what made you go to London to start?
Oh, I moved with my ex-boyfriend. I was in New York for a long time. I was doing like art film things in the art world a little bit, and just sick of New York. I'd been there for 11 years, and then he got transferred, and I was like, okay, let's go. And then we moved and broke up right away, and then I just ended up staying for 12 years. And I sort of like, and I was like, first I was trying to get into the art world there, which is next to impossible if you're not in that loop. And I always edited on the side, so I was getting like, I just sort of fell into the documentary thing, and I started working on just like big depressing documentaries about like foster children or adopted children that had been returned, or soldiers with PTSD committing suicide. So I had this whole like depressing documentary persona, and then the show Scott King from New York like remembered me from doing funny short stuff, and he hired me to edit difficult people. So it was like just this gigantic shift.
Well, he's like, you're doing depressing, hard stuff. Why don't you come and have some mean people in your life?
But it was great. I mean, I loved that. I loved going back. I mean, I still do a little bit too, but like that going back and forth is it's great. You don't get bored, It's like, and you don't, and also you just keep growing. I think you can really fall back on your, habits if you just keep doing the same type of stuff all the time. Yeah. So.
Well, how do you keep from? Because that's one of the things I always found troublesome with documentaries is you're dealing with heavy material. How do you, I guess, separate yourself, or I guess brighten your life up a bit outside of the edit suite so it doesn't become a heavy?
There's two times it really bothered me. Was one, I was doing a thing on ISIS at the sort of beginning of ISIS, and I remember I was watching a lot of, I remember what it was. They were kidnapping Yazidi women as sex slaves and stuff like that, and then we had like this footage they took of like decapitated heads, and like we were editing in this like depressing basement off Gray's Inn Road, which is all a depressing name for a road, and that one that hit me. Like I remember like something happened to me for like 2 weeks during that edit. I was just like, oh, and actually I quit doing docs for a little bit after that because it just got too much. And then I did a Frontline on COVID back in April. And that was also, that kind of hit me kind of hard too, because that was like when no one knew when anything was going. We thought we were going to die. We didn't know what was going on. You could touch your mail, you were going to have be in ICU. So that one hit me too, and I had to like step back and take a break a little.
I still remember the day they were like, "It's airborne." I was like, "Oh, we're screwed." Like every action movie's like, "Oh, it's airborne," and we all get screwed.
So I think you do have to be careful a bit. You know what I mean? And but I do love digging into that stuff. I mean, it's fascinating to dig into that stuff and see the people who are up against those huge challenges. You know what I mean? It's there's also something kind of nice about it too, where it's like it puts you in your place of where, you know what I mean? And you're like, oh, we're doing the important work.
It's humbling, I guess you could say.
Yeah, it's humbling. It is.
Yeah. Well, and I think because I had a friend who cut a film, and they just one day 42 hours of genocide footage showed up, and they were just like, we need to talk about boundaries.
But the broad, like BBC and PBS, and like they're great about that. You know what I mean? They're like, oh, if you take a, they understand. You know what I mean? And they'll give you a moment if you need a moment.
Yeah. So if in terms of like your career, what would you say was the most challenging scene from an editorial standpoint, like trying to craft the story? What would you say is the most challenging scene you've had?
Well, without naming specifics, so I don't get anyone in trouble, it's like when there's terrible actors. I think, you know what I mean? Sometimes with like bad acting, if you have bad acting and bad writing, I haven't come across so much actually, but bad acting sometimes that's when you're really like, how do I make this person look good? You know what I mean? And I'm not going to say who. It has happened, and it's just like, God, you know.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, and not naming names, but like, how do you approach fixing it in that situation?
It's I think when things are very cutty, you can hide a lot of bad acting. You know what I mean? And you can put stuff on other people. And I watched a film. There's a film that I love that I watched. I also won't name it because I don't want to get anyone in trouble. Which I thought was just genius, and like I thought, oh my God, these actors are great, and blah blah blah. Then I watched it again, and it was one of those really fast cut films, Yeah. And I was like, oh no. I was like, this, and both the actors didn't really do much after it. And I noticed, I was like, oh no, that was all the editing, like just getting it. And if you can just, everyone has their 2-3 seconds you can grab where it looks amazing and stuff. And so I think a lot of that is just, finding those moments. And then sometimes you have to rewrite in the edit a little bit to get out the stuff that's just never going to work. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, what do you look for then in the rushes?
Sometimes.
What do you look for in the rushes to get that authenticity then?
I don't know if you can really name it. It's just like it happened. You know what I mean? Because it's sort of like you have like Natasha Lyonne's authenticity, which is completely different from Cate Blanchett's authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Because Cate Blanchett is so kind of classical kind of thing, and Natasha's coming from much more of a almost performance art kind of thing. I don't know. Maybe she would hate if I said that, but it just seemed it's just a very different approach to how they act. So I don't think it's something you're like, okay, these are the things I'm looking for. You're just like, this is what's there and what's great about. You have to figure out what's great about that, and then just lean into it.
Well, I love where Natasha has gone because I feel like Orange. Yeah, but I mean, like Orange is the New Black, Russian Doll, like from a career perspective, like starting in American Pie, I'm glad she's made this transition because it's so much more interesting.
Playhouse.
Yeah, there you go. Viewers Playhouse.
She was full of. No, but even now, like I'm doing season 2 right now, and like her level of like what she's doing, I think she's just like refining it. It's kind of incredible. Like, wow, she's just such a tour. It's great. I love working with people like that, who really like just have their thing that they're just like Julie is like, in a completely different way, but Julie is like that too.
I guess I have one last question that I like to ask everyone I interview.
Okay.
We've been stuck in COVID for quite a while now, and a lot of people are locked in depending on where you are in the world. Mm-hmm. So we've all been watching streaming services. Is there a show or a movie that you discovered on streaming service that you think everyone should check out?
Underground Railroad.
Someone else mentioned that to me today.
He's like Stanley Kubrick. It's just mind-blowing how his level of craft is just like incredible. It's interesting now, and I'm just like I'm not one of those people that screams at the television. Like screaming at the television when I'm watching it. It's fucking like just another level.
It's interesting because the other person I talked to today, it was just like, it's a masterpiece. Like I'm going out there and I'm going to say it now, and it's like I've never heard the person say that about anything.
Yeah,
so.
I told my friend about it, who's like this big writer here in LA and stuff. He's like, oh, I don't know, it feels like homework. I'm like, no, just like try it. Yeah. They just texted me after the second episode. He's like, holy shit. It's incredible. It's harsh. I mean, it's really harsh, but it's like I don't have enough good things to say about it.
Well, thank you so much for letting me interview.
No problem. Yeah.